This is Pleiku, 250 miles north of Saigon, the air base that was ripped by Vietnamese communist guerrillas. 8 Americans died in the attack that brought swift retaliation by U.S. and South Vietnamese forces. From carriers and land bases, 49 jets struck back at staging areas just across the border in North Vietnam. The Red Guerrillas were able to slip by Vietnamese guards in the middle of the night raid and lob mortar shells into the area, while hand-carried bombs were placed under aircraft and against barrack walls. Why security was so lax is the object of 2 investigations, although some officers say full protection against such attacks is impossible in this jungle war. There is mute evidence of the toll the guerrillas took here. First official word of the retaliatory attacks comes from Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara in a briefing for newsmen. The map shows the relative position of 3 carriers attached to the 7th Fleet, as well as the 3 U.S. bases that were hit by the Viet Cong. This is what followed.
Immediately following the attack, U.S. representatives in Saigon met with representatives of the South Vietnamese government. They jointly agreed that joint retaliatory action was required. The President's approval of this action was given after the action was discussed with and recommended by the National Security Council at a meeting held between 7:45 p.m. and 9 p.m. last night.
Mr. McNamara said that the raiding U.S. jets hit Dong Hoi Barracks, where most Red troops are equipped for their forays to the south. In the first raid, land-based planes were forced back by the weather, but the carrier jets completed their strike with the loss of 1 American plane. Later, photo reconnaissance flights proved that much of the staging area had been completely destroyed. The confrontation between the Reds and the West was the most critical since the Gulf of Tonkin incident last summer, when the U.S. replied just as swiftly to North Vietnam PT boat attacks. The second raid came the next day, when South Vietnamese pilots struck anew at bases across the border. Here again, a successful mission was carried out as the Red Communication Center at Vinh Linh was bombed and strafed. Both Beiping and Moscow were slow to comment on these retaliatory raids. Finally, they both promised to back the North Vietnamese regime. Asian reaction, however, was that the 2 Red powers had lost face in the East-West showdown. To bolster defenses in South Vietnam, a Hawk ground-to-air missile unit has gone on duty. Meanwhile, President Johnson's Special Assistant for Security Affairs, McGeorge Bundy, arrives at the scene of the Viet Cong raid. He was in Vietnam on a mission for the president when the attacks took place, and he holds a battlefront conference with Lieutenant General Con before returning to Washington. While he conferred with Vietnamese officials, the National Security Council was meeting in Washington. It was these meetings that brought the swift decision to strike back at the Viet Cong, to re-emphasize our resolve to continue to defend the cause of freedom in Southeast Asia. Before leaving for home, Mr. Bundy flew to the 8th Field Hospital to visit the men wounded in the guerrilla attack. 108 men were wounded, 79 of them seriously. Mr. Bundy was to say later that he found morale high among the men, a factor that the president says our enemies always underestimate. Mr. Bundy arrives back in Washington the next day, and he immediately goes into conference with the president and the Security Council. He tells reporters that he found political and religious factions in Vietnam united in their belief that the Viet Cong is their common enemy.
When we had an opportunity to talk frankly and freely with them, they again emphasized the overriding importance in South Vietnam of the contest against the communists. They emphasized, as the political leaders had done, the importance and their own dedication to, the importance of and their dedication to the task of forming a stable and effective political society under a stable and effective government in that country, a view which, of course, we share. And I think it's fair to say that the Americans in Vietnam are in very good heart and are prepared to continue even against this kind of danger and this kind of sneak attack. Let me say one more thing about that sneak attack, that in a war of this kind in which there are no fixed lines, in which there are large territories that are lightly inhabited and that are essentially jungle and mountainous in character. I know no military man who believes that without an overwhelming assignment of local defense forces, it is possible to guarantee against this kind of sneak attack. This is the sort of thing, and all Americans in the area know it, with which we simply have to contend while we prosecute in company with the government and people of South Vietnam a contest against communism, which is of the highest importance to our national interest.
This Rome Plow, made in Cedartown, Georgia, may not look like much of a weapon, but it turns out it's a potent weapon in the fight against the Viet Cong. The engineers of the 1st Division are using it to knock down the jungle and so deny the VC a sanctuary in Binh Duong province north of Saigon, the spot General William Westmoreland once called the toughest province in all Vietnam for VC domination. This is the village of Phu Chan, whose 4,000 residents used to be safe only during the day. At night, the Viet Cong would come out of the dense jungle that surrounded Phu Chan to collect their taxes, get their provisions, terrorize the villagers. But now the jungle around Phu Chan has been knocked down. It's gone. And so is the Viet Cong. They had no place to hide. The same is true all over Binh Duong province. From the air, it looks as though some giant paring knife had peeled the top off the earth below. Each one of these $70,000 monsters can sweep 15 acres in a 10-hour day. In lower Binh Duong alone, they've cleared 3,000 acres to help bring security to 20,000 people. Security, a vital beginning to pacification. But the dozers do more than just knock things down. They help to build, too. The man in charge of the operation is Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Haig of Arlington, Virginia.
This is land that was formerly non-productive and of no value at all to the people.
Because it was jungle.
That's correct. Now we, of course, are clearing it, and we immediately follow up with development personnel to plant and to cultivate this land and make it productive for the people of Vietnam.
The plows sweep both sides of all important roads, too, making them secure for travel day and night. The men who man the plows are so proud of the work they're doing that they've left their special mark upon the countryside, the castle, the emblem of the engineers. Private First Class Joseph Martinez of Boston, Massachusetts runs this Rome plow. It looks as though it gives you quite a ride, Joe.
Sure does. You'll get tired after a day's work.
Any injuries inside?
No.
What about booby traps? Do you ever hit them?
Quite a few.
And?
Nobody gets hurt. Just might blow a little crack off the dozer, but nobody gets hurt to it.
Do you feel as though you're helping to win the war?
Sure do.
In what way?
Well, push down all Charlie's jungle. We can't hide anywhere.
Mike Wallace, CBS News, Binh Duong province.
But in the summer of 1965, 33-year-old CBS correspondent Morley Safer filed what would become one of the most controversial television reports of the war. Early on the morning of August 3rd, he had been invited to join a search and destroy operation at a suspected Viet Cong stronghold south of Da Nang.
I talked to a captain, tried to get some idea of what the operation was about, and he said, well, we got orders to take out this complex of villages called Cam Nay. And I never heard anything like that. He said to take out this complex of villages. And I thought perhaps he's exaggerating. We got in. The troops walked across towards this village.
Come this way, Con.
And started torching every house that I could see as far as I could see.
This is what the war in Vietnam is all about. The old and the very young. The Marines have burned this old couple's cottage because fire was coming from here.
The trooper with the flamethrower was ordered to zap a particular house, and Vietnamese cameraman put his camera down and said, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. We could hear people crying. Every Vietnamese house has a shelter of some kind. And down there was a family, probably 6 people, including a practically newborn baby. They were frightened stiff. They didn't want to come out, and he coaxed them out. And then the house was torched.
Been in action like this before, Marine?
No, I haven't. Not like this, I haven't.
Did you set fire to these houses here?
No, we were just off to the left of it when it was burning.
Were you getting fire from them?
Somewhat, not too much. Just a little sniper fire.
The day's operation burned down 150 houses, wounded 3 women, killed 1 baby, wounded 1 Marine, and netted these 4 prisoners. 4 old men who could not answer questions put to them in English.
Cam Ranh was a shock. People saw American troops acting the way people had never seen before. And to see young GIs and big guys in flak jackets lighting up thatched roofs and women holding babies running away, wailing. This was a new sight, really, to everyone.
It went against the American myth of 1,000 Westerns in the movies. It is the Indians who are torturing women and children and the cavalry that rides up at the last minute to free them. And here was this jarring thing of our troops, instead of giving out chewing gum to kids, turning the firepower really on a village. It raised, in a very elemental way, the question of whether we were on the right side. What could be happening if our boys are doing this?
I think what makes the story in a certain way most significant was that it was happening on television, uncensored, either in picture or commentary. This wouldn't have happened in World War II, or if it had happened, it wouldn't have been photographed. Or had it been photographed, the photographs would have been censored or taken away. There was a realization that the rules have all changed.
Today's operation is the frustration of Vietnam in miniature. There is little doubt that American firepower can win a military victory here. But to a Vietnamese peasant whose home means a lifetime of back-breaking labor, it will take more than presidential promises to convince him that we are on his side. Morley Safer, CBS News, near the village of Cam Ranh.
To say that we are closer to victory today is to believe, in the face of the evidence, the optimists who have been wrong in the past. To suggest we are on the edge of defeat is to yield to unreasonable pessimism. To say that we are mired in stalemate seems the only realistic, if unsatisfactory, conclusion. On the off chance that military and political analysts are right, in the next few months we must test the enemy's intentions in case this is indeed his last big gasp before negotiations. But it is increasingly clear to this reporter that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could. This is Walter Cronkite. Good night.
Military police got back into the compound of the $2.5 million embassy complex at dawn. Before that, a platoon of Viet Cong were in control. The communist raiders never got into the main chancery building. A handful of Marines had it locked and kept them out. But the raiders were everywhere else. By daylight, Tongan Boulevard, where the embassy is located, was a battleground. No one, unless identified, was allowed in the street.
Get out, dude! Get back!
An Australian military policeman was standing guard, firing warning shots to keep the street clear. The bodies of 2 American military policemen who died as they tried to assault the compound lay near their jeep across the boulevard. This is where the Viet Cong raiders broke in. They'd sneaked up and blasted a hole in the reinforced concrete fence surrounding the compound. They had the big embassy wall to protect them. They were inside before anyone knew it. But none of the raiders lived to tell of their exploit. By 8 o'clock, 5 hours after they first broke in, almost all of them were dead. All in civilian clothes, they'd been armed with American M16 rifles and also rocket launchers and rockets. They had explosives, their purpose apparently to destroy the embassy. In that purpose, they did not succeed.
A villa on the embassy grounds was the residence of the mission coordinator, George Jacobson. He was trapped there on the second floor. American soldiers tossed him weapons to defend himself. Later, when it was all over, Jacobson told what had happened.
What could you see from your window? Were the VC in the buildings?
No, I did not see any VC in the building, except that I knew that there was at least one VC in my house. I knew that he was on the bottom floor of my house.
You had quite an escape at the very end. How did that happen?
Well, they put riot gas into the bottom floors of my house, which, of course, would drive whoever was down below up top where I was. They had thrown me a pistol about 10 minutes before this occurred. And with all the luck that I've had all of my life, I got him before he got me.
With the
I'm
pistol,
sorry.
And he had what?
An M16.
And you got him.
The commanding general, William Westmoreland, described the embassy attack as a Viet Cong defeat.
General, how would you assess yesterday's activities and today's? What is the enemy doing? Are these major attacks or...
That's EOD setting off a couple of M79 duds, I believe.
General, how would you assess the enemy's purposes yesterday and today?
The enemy very deceitfully has taken advantage of the Tet truce in order to create maximum consternation within South Vietnam, particularly in the populated areas. In my opinion, this is diversionary to his main effort, which he had planned to take place in Quang Tri province. From Laos toward Khe Sanh and across the demilitarized zone. This attack has not yet materialized. His schedule has probably been thrown off balance because of our very effective airstrikes. Now, yesterday, the enemy exposed himself by virtue of this strategy, and he suffered great casualties.
Other battles were raging in the streets of Saigon, one not far from the presidential palace. An attack on the palace itself had been driven back. The enemy had been planning the Tet offensive for the past 6 months. Almost 100 tons of military supplies had been moved into the region around Saigon. The Viet Cong had chosen a number of strategic targets. Don Webster described the battle for one of them.
This is the main Vietnamese language radio station in Saigon, and right now there are an undisclosed number of VC inside occupying the station. They are not broadcasting on the air, and they're surrounded by South Vietnamese troops, and they're pinned down inside. We think they're going to be throwing tear gas any moment now to try to get them out that way. There's been a lot of shooting out the windows from inside, up on the second floor. The attack on the radio station started at 2:30 in the morning. The Viet Cong pulled up in cars. They killed the guards outside and stormed the station. The suicide squad of Viet Cong apparently intended to blow up the station rather than just taking it over. The large packages carry plastique, more than enough to blow up the entire station, including the Viet Cong. Even now, 8 hours after the attack started, there are still a few Viet Cong hiding inside the station. One by one, the VC are located and killed, and their bodies are unceremoniously dragged outside and down the street.
The communists did not succeed in broadcasting from the station, but they did destroy much of its equipment before they were killed or captured. Five days after the combat began, the enemy was still fighting. George Severson described the battle in one of Saigon's slums.
This neighborhood is called Ban Kur, or the chessboard because of the maze of alleys and passageways. Its residents are mostly poor working people, and its slums are a refuge for Saigon's hoodlum and criminal elements. A Southeast Asian version of the Lower East Side or the Algerian Casbah. Vietnamese Rangers and Marines moved carefully, blasting buildings and possible Viet Cong hiding places before moving ahead. This was the first time heavy fighting has taken place in Saigon proper. Until now, most of it has been in the Chinese section of Cho Lon and in the suburbs. The VC were difficult to dislodge. They obviously knew the section well and had built barricades in key spots. Often, the only way around them was to take to the roofs. The Rangers and Marines took casualties, mostly from hidden snipers. The enemy was nowhere and everywhere. As soon as a section had been cleared, more terror-stricken civilians scurried out of their homes. Thousands of them fleeing from the bullets and explosives, and even more dangerous, a fire that began to rage out of control. Residents in nearby buildings began dragging their most precious possessions out of their shops and homes. Saigon's water supply system is operating only at 70% of normal, so fires are a serious menace. For these people, many of them who fled the war from outlying villages, this is the cruelest blow. The curfew has kept them from making a living. Food prices have tripled since the fighting began a week ago. And now, their homes are being destroyed.
The fighting is taking place around the Cho-Rei Hospital in Cho Lon, the Chinese section of the city. The most unnerving part of this kind of fighting is the possibility of snipers popping out of practically every doorway, every window. They're equipped with rifles, machine guns, and rocket launchers. How long have you been fighting in Saigon?
It's broke out about 6-7 days ago. I've been fighting ever since then.
You've been fighting out in the field, too?
Right.
Which do you prefer?
The field.
Why?
I don't know. You can't find them around here. In the field, at least you can call in airstrikes or something if something happens.
This is Saigon Hospital in downtown Saigon. It's been working overtime since the beginning of the Great Tet Offensive, and it's in hospitals like this all over the country that the real tragedy of the fighting can be seen. Over 3,000 wounded have been admitted to Saigon's 9 civilian hospitals. Cases like these, bullet and shrapnel wounds. More than 200 have died in the hospitals. No one knows how many have died without reaching them. Hardly a day has passed in this war without the death or wounding of innocent civilians. But up until now, this has been mainly in the countryside. Now the Viet Cong have carried the war into the cities, and there seems to be no place to hide from the bombs and the bullets. George Sievertson, CBS News, in Saigon.